This is a production of Cornell University Library.
So this is Roald Hoffmann, and this is our Chat in the Stacks program. We're going to begin in a rather different way in that I will read 3 poems, and then I will get an introduction, and then we'll go on to some other things. So these are 3 poems from my book, Constants of the Motion. And in the first one, the only thing I would say is Duke is the name of a family, a Ukrainian family that hid us out during the Second World War. The gaze. My mother says, every day we look death in the eye. She's proud of her English. Were you scared, Mommy? Yes, and then she smiles, the rare smile of the sick. He looked away. I was there, but a child can't see. I imagine now my mother, her brothers, and Nunya and I in the attic in our long dark evenings, for what if Duke's neighbors saw a light? There, death comes riding into small village noises, death with spats holster, a whip breaking branches as he rides, working quietly his way through lists, ridding green earth of a worm in the eye. His roaming stops by Duke's school. Inside, they hear hoofbeats that stop. Death spots them across 2 walls, and they look him in the eye. And then death, boots, spurs, and all smells stale cabbage soup, which reminds him of the dead soiling themselves. He looks away, fastidious death, and comes back the next day. The next poem does need a little bit of an introduction. It comes from a story I heard about Hitokoto Nushi, who was a native god at Katsuragi near Yoshino, and under the mastery of a Buddhist ascetic, he built for him a great bridge between Katsuragi and Yoshino. But the mountain god moved stones, it says, only in the dark of night, lest he scare the people. And I just thought that was very interesting. Those gods were meant to look scary. Why did this god, why was he so sensitive that he worried about people seeing him? I'm not the only one to worry about this. Matsuo Basho, who's a great Japanese poet, wrote a poem now in a different season, that of the cherry blossoms in Yoshino, and he said, more than ever I want to see in these blossoms at dawn the god's face. He was talking about that same god. Here's the poem. A weed, a god. Here the weed the jeep crushed will rise up. It has lived through worse, that scraggly plant. A seasoned refugee from agro schemes for prepped fields, genes crafted into berries to thwart pesticides that will past snap back. A survivor, the weed emigrates to gullies. Crossing the God's bridge, people now drive to misty Yoshino to watch the sakura cherry, Prunus cerulata bloom. The pink blossoms signal transience in their free-floating yet certain fall. We see the steady march of the spring cherry season up Japan. The weed and I, cousins that some remove, did race down a hall of chemical mirrors. In us confined congeries of enzymes brew life, and co-opting chance find forked ways to breathe, range, and reconstruct. These I would know, for pretty or ugly, we wouldn't be if the weed weren't. In the sakura blossoms, the sensitive god's face hides in pink shimmers. I look for him here too, in the shadows that flit behind the petals. What moved him will never be simple, and the veil will lift, may show a face terrible with viruses passed on God to us, trapped in our genes and molecules as benign as venomous, and maybe kindnesses will come too in a tinkerer's edgy patch on a gentle echo of the weed. In the beginning of this poem, I made a mistake in the reading. I misread the word wilt, but you can see it. That's one benefit of having the poem up here. And now the third poem that I want to read, and this is set in a totally different place in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. And the only thing that I would say here is that the word sublime of Latin origin comes from meaning under the lintel of a doorway, let's say. In the middle, there was a place for me to stand, touch red-brown bark on each fairy ring tree. Then the eyes take charge, soar up bare trunks to the overlapping small branches the loggers burned. A sukkah of redwoods, but its roof is full of fire. The texture of Egyptian palm fronds up there. I am set adrift by branches that may go down, but the eye pulls up to a dome. I try to undo the logic of a strange vertical vanishing point, so a glance up this second growth of 100-year-old stolid cylinders ends up in gaudy uncertainty, there where the late afternoon sun up to its metamorphoses crafts green and gold organic stained glass in the leading of branches an arm thick. In this narrow cathedral, I could write grace sermons, fly past desire, rest. Here you can't hood your eyes. Here you are drawn, you and not you, under the lintel, rising up to it out of yourself, alone above. And that's the end of my 3 poems. Now I'll come back to where these come from and how they are related to me. But let me now turn it over to Leah.
Thank you very much, Roald. That was beautiful. Hello, everyone. I'm Leah McEwen. I'm the chemistry librarian here at Cornell. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this Chats in the Stats book talk with Dr. Hoffman. This is the 5th of 7 faculty presenting as part of our spring semester lineup. Before we go further, I do just want to acknowledge that Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Cayuga Nation. The Cayuga Nation are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and temporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. And we acknowledge the painful history of the Cayuga Nation dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of the people, past and present, to these lands and waters. The Cornell University's Library's Chats in the Stacks book series is now in its 16th year and is dedicated to providing faculty authors an opportunity to share their recently published books with a cross-disciplinary audience. And that audience is growing larger all the time. And in this last year with the pandemic, we're transitioning to a virtual format. And while we look forward, again, to welcoming in-person audiences, we are cheered to see so many people joining us each time. I just want to mention before we introduce Roald further that there will be a question and answer session following the reading. So please feel free to type questions you may have for Roald in the chat box at any time, and we'll try to get to these after he's done with the reading. And now just a few words about Roald. Roald is a highly regarded member of the chemistry community at Cornell. He's been serving here since 1965. So many of us know him as a scientist, but he also actively engages in many other genres of creative expression. And he's published several books of poetry, of which Constance of the Motion that he is reading from today is the 6th. He's also published 2 bilingual collections of poetry in Spanish and Russian. and his poems have appeared in several poetry magazines and been performed in music, film, and dramatic productions. And reviewers have hailed him as an accomplished craftsman and noted this keen sense of observation and curiosity, successfully connecting cultures of art and science. And I would certainly agree with that. So now, Roald, let us hear more of your poems. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. I want to say something about where I come from in poetry. As for many people, most everything for me begins in college, and that was Columbia. And what you see at left here is a portrait of Mark Van Doren, a great poet, not much remembered today. You may have seen him in a movie quiz show, but Mark was a great teacher. He wasn't allowed to teach how to write poetry, but only how to read it. That was the times, but I still remember Mark Van Doren reading to us Wallace Stevens' Sunday Morning. I've never forgotten that. I never took a course. I should have taken a course. You can ask me why one should take a course, but I didn't. But a little later in life, I sat in on a course that Maxine Kuhlman taught at MIT, and it was very useful to me. Especially useful in my poetic development was a group of people that met at Cornell in the Temple of Zeus, and prime among them was Archie Ammons, a great figure in Cornell's history, no longer with us. Here you see him. He was my guru. He taught me a lot. Here's the Temple of Zeus at upper left. It's now been replaced by a classroom, but it was a coffee shop down there in the shadow of plaster casts of classical statues. I don't think that leg coming in front right was quite belonging to a classical statue, but it looked like that really. And there is Archie at right, sitting at a table in the Temple of Zeus, talking to a student, which is what he did a lot of the time. We formed a group, Archie and Phyllis Janowitz, who was in the Cornell faculty. She was the other professional in the group, so to speak. And then David Burek, who is a poet and a Cornell figure, and who still comes around, and I. And we were the amateurs in this, but we learned a lot from this joint experience of reading poems to each other and thinking about them. So that tells you where I come from. What do I write about? You heard one poem, the first one that I wrote, about the wartime experience of hiding. And that is certainly one thing I write about. That is the war and childhood and the fortune of having grown up in the Holocaust, actually, not in just its shadow, but right in the middle of it. And we survived, but for instance, my father and 3 or 4 grandparents did not. My mother and I survived in hiding. So I certainly write about that, but I don't want to be typed as a poet of the Holocaust. I will read you one more a poem in which has memories, but I also write thinking about what happened. Let me read you the poem of memory here. The exchange. We have something we think is yours, Pani Clara, said the daughter-in-law of the man who hid us in an Univ attic in 43 and 4. Luba had come to Brooklyn to work for a year or 2. From her purse, she took out a man's gold ring, held it out to Mommy. My mother, whose eyes had failed, passed the ring to me. I made out the engraved initials FR and said, "It's Uncle Fromch's ring, I think. My uncle has a son. We paid them in gold, at the end in jewelry, all we had. But no gold could buy goodness or life, not in those days, not in Ukraine. I put the ring in my mother's palm. In one motion, her wrinkled hand, steady as it had not been in years, she gave it back to Luba. It's yours. I did not understand my mother at that point, but later I understood. And I have made a play out of this real exchange that took place. The play is called Something That Belongs to You. And you can read more up there about my mother's and my survival. I have also been thinking, sometimes a lot, about survival, about different ways, about the experience of people. And here is a poem from that thinking. Though it mentions the dukes, this is not directly a poem of memory, as you see, rat language. There's a woman trapped under a grate. She spoke to me calmly, asking for help. We must save her, but move slowly, for she's grown in there, grown to the shape of the sewer. Her bones must be bent. We can't just take her out. Her muscles must be massaged. Before we walked out in June 44, walked from the Dukes to the Russian lines, did they massage the men's legs, the stronger women? They were swollen. There was no place to walk. In the storeroom where we hid, the bunker we dug out under it, we must lift her gently with oil poured around her. With a winch, there's time. Please talk to her. Ask her how she came in the sewer, why her children left her. Was there a time she could lift the grate? Ask her what food people threw her way, where her patients came from, and who else lived in the sewers. And did she learn rat language? Meanwhile, I'll get help. Now I have to leave the Holocaust and I write about other things. You heard me write in the first poems that I read, things that have to do with the Santa Cruz Mountains, or another poem of place there. I write about the place I'm in and nature. Nature helps me move from the everyday hustle and bustle of work to a place where I can write poetry. So I've benefited from stays at various times in places. Let me tell you about two of those places. And in the book, there are some poems from those places. One of them was in 2004. I went for a couple of weeks to the Penland School of Crafts, a traditional crafts place in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains. And I wrote a series of 8 poems about the crafts. And here is one of them. Tectonics. Genesis. Not God or Rabbi Lowe. Today it's just Roald squeezing a ball of clay, his small stake in creation. Did they begin this way? 2 thumbs, hesitant in clay? Yes, for now there is the other, a hole in the holy round. He remembers. He was 6, June 1944, 5 Jews walking out of hiding to the Russian lines, the fertile fields sodden in spring rains, no way through, but through the clay his uncles are leaning on the women his mother carries him. Take clay. A thing with magic begs to be understood. Kaolin and feldspar, hydrated aluminosilicates layer like taking up water, platelets sliding past each other, reversible to a point. This lesson may be of use, but who will do the kneading? Centrifugal. In a world of seductive tugs out and not just at the wheel, all you can do is keep plastic balance and build by hand the higher shape within. A hand of clay is not the clay hand of a broken idol. It's a woman in Angola reaching out with a can of milk. It's the hands now too, moving nervously of a man told his son is missing in Chechnya. Subtractive. So now this wet object faces me, ample evidence to being far out of the Creator's league. But God was into salvage, I recall, and my teacher says there are tools, all those fingers, a grater, a curvy metal disc, and this slip slurry formation is as much a matter of taking off as adding on. My hands on the pot, remember, oh, how they reached out for yours, hand over hand, one summer day. Where people were, there are shards. There is clay on my hands. There is clay in my hair. It'll wash off, not the clay in my heart. So you will see the various themes come together in this poem, and I want them to come together. Another place, there are more poems and crafts in the book, and some of them I'm really happy with. Another place, I made a retreat for myself in 2 off-season months and winters, was the Lubaron in Provence, an inland part of Provence in France, a cultivated land which has been farmed for olives and grapes and truffles for thousands of years. And I wrote a number of poems that I feel came out in that period. Here is one it's actually dedicated for David Lindfors, who made that sculpture of a man running that's on the cover of the book. Singing in the Rain, Provence. Walking in rain in a yellow slicker is as close as I'll get to dancing. No one is out to watch me either, though I did pass some sad dogs and 2 English women. My umbrella is furled, back pain, but with good boots. A hood, who knows what I might see down this old path. Maybe wild boars mating with pigs, or the rain could twist like an integral sign, or its drops reach and cease hold in lines at 45 degrees, ukiyo-e rain, corrugated tin sheet rain over the cherries. So the rain proffers shelter, from which something sings out of me. Donald O'Connor winks, watch it, kid. He says, keep waving your arms like that and a wet, sharp thorn bush is going to catch on to you. Okay, that was just fun. Another thing that I write about, and initially I thought I would write more about it, and it didn't work. And you can ask me about why it didn't work, which is science. And you expect me to write about science, but it's hard in general. I will tell you, though, here how it works out, and you will see in the poems where the science comes in various ways, if it does come in. But here's a story. It's a story that in 1953, Watson and Crick postulated a double helix for the structure of DNA. In 2003 was the 50th anniversary, and Nature magazine, which had published the original paper, wanted to publish a special issue. And so they asked me to write a poem about the discovery of DNA. I don't get asked to write many poems. So of course I wrote one. Actually, I wrote 3. I sent them in and I got a nice letter back from Nature saying they really didn't want a poem from me. Basically, they didn't like any of the poems. Okay. One of the poems, actually, I think all 3 of them are pretty good. This one's called Code Memory, and I will read it for you. Walk into a Ticino Alps wild strawberry midsummer. Wait, I forgot to tell you, there's a young Russian coming up. That's Vladimir Nabokov, in case you don't recognize him. And there is, this was written in a Ticino mountains in Switzerland, actually. And near the Italian border. It was a very special kind of place. Walk into a Ticino Alps wild strawberry midsummer, see the blues flit, conjure up a young Russian with a net. Elsewhere by lamplight, one you loved can look at the old photos and say, you smile like your father. He also wore a cap. The way he lit up in 53, two young women just willing a model into being, walk toward them, past the monk tending peas, onto stains, agar plates, and centrifuges. Come walk by the light of signals from within, past X-shaped diffraction patterns, on past 53, heady with the logic of splice and heal, the profligate wonders of polymerases, into denominable bounty down this biochemical rope trick of a molecule, its rings sticky signposts tied to a backbone, chain, 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 she sings, run of sugars on sweet and phosphate triads, there's memory's lair, the inexpugnable trail of every enzyme that worked and those that did but for a while, every affair the senses had with a niche, the genes turned off as we came out of water, what worked, what nearly killed, the insinuating virus code immured in coiled softness, co-opted symbiotes, move, for here, wiggling and collision, gauge shape down necklaces of meaning interrupted by sputters, the ons, offs, intent, a tinkerer's means to function that escapes us, on to difference, earthy life, its dendro arms, hazarding berry and you, to the butterfly that lights up torn earth in Srebrenica and Zločo, that flies to the far place love obstinately chose. An Alp is to be climbed. They did, our mid-century elixirs. But oh, an Alp is also a sweet shoulder of a mountain, that meadow reaching for snowline, the place where men drive cattle, rest, move higher, and Alp is clover, a place to feed and watch another blue. Now the morning glories winding grasp and climb. The word sings in Alp and alkaline phosphatase and DNA in nuanced refrain, this side of memory of a world that was and one that will be. The butterfly that lights up on torn earth is a reference to a great book of poems by a Danish poet, Ingrid Christensen, and who wrote of that butterfly. Okay, the science goes on. The science goes on and it comes in. When it works for me, it comes in naturally. And you will have to decide when it works and when it doesn't. And what are the difficulties with building science into poems? One of the things about Archie Ammons was that he was very sympathetic to natural history, certainly, but also to other kinds of science. And he felt it intuitively. And somehow his permissiveness to work science into the poems meant a lot to me in those days. If I reflect on what I think works well for me, one of the things that works is I'm pretty good at telling a story in a poem, of setting up a narrative within a poem. And so I want to read you two examples of that. This is now set on an artist colony in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California. Let me just drink some water here. A brain is lying on the ranch road. Dr. X, it says in a quiet southern voice. I look around to see if anyone else is there, but it sure looks like the same dirt road I've hiked before. So I squat down to hear it better, and I have to confess to see if it's growing out of the ground. Dr. X, it asks. I'm not Dr. X, Brain. Oh, I'm so happy you aren't. This is getting more complicated by the minute, but hey, it's California. I take a stab. Are you from his lab? No. Well, yes, frankly, I escaped, the Brain says, real matter of fact. Can't think of any Dr. X, though. Who knows what Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Lab is up to? I sneak a look at those hemispheres. Didn't recall they split so much. Brain, you don't seem to have your life support along, I worry. The wind is picking up and the brain, well, it's moist looking, as I imagine brains ought to be. And sitting there among the chamomiles, not quite your sterile environment. Yes, I had to leave in a hurry. This sounds like one cool brain. I can't see you. There was no time to take the eyes I'm hooked up to. I try to visualize Dr. X's lab, but what I say is, I've never met a talking brain. You mean yours doesn't talk to you? Wow. Well, mine's a bit of a mess. But you've met people who talk as if they didn't have a brain. I whistle while trying to figure this out. This brain has attitude. Listen, brain, I say, we've got to get you out of the road. Some folks might just drive over you. No brainer. Ha, ha, ha. The brain doesn't laugh. Well, doctor. Roald, but you can call me Pooh. Roald, just pick me up with your surgical gloves. Brain, this is a ranch. We ain't got no surgical gloves. Well, I wasn't going to pick the brain up with my hands. So I ripped 2 pages out of the notebook I carry for moments of inspiration, you know, and slip it or try under the brain. Easy does it, he says. Back at the ranch, the brain is a big hit with the artists. The talk drifts around to left side, right side stuff on which the brain, after a drink, opines. As Hank says, my left side knows my right side's cheating hard. You're mixing metaphors, brain. Roald, you are a bear of little, and I am the source of all metaphor. I try to get back at the brain, quoting what I just learned about the neocortex not being where the emotions rise. Just then, the power goes kaput. The next day, my brain is gone, leaving on the counter a CD of Johnny Cash's greatest hits. Okay, that's, I guess, a poem. Let me try another one. Miserlo. By the full moon, the hill called, she climbed, her time off the telescope. Days her eyes would go to the canyon's green life, but this night only pasture lit up, and the moon, well, it just lorded it over Hercules. She thought were children of a sun coalesced from cinders, the debris of dead stars, a fluke of nuclear levels. This too will burn out. And pulling her sweater round her, she whispered to no one in particular, I'm alone on this hill, and would lean against him, his arms round me from behind. This being sad, she sang, who's gonna shoe my pretty little foot? Which made her feel a little better. And because it seemed fine to keep on speaking, said to the hill, those stones there must have been a slide, but I suppose you don't need to be told that, hill. And why am I in this body when I see 1 billion years in my star spectrum? Ask how retinol's made. And because she was alone and sore troubled, the earth answered her with slow sighs. The wind came first, swirled her skirt, then she heard the swish surf of grass and listened for the first time to its ancient stories of shared genes of wheat, hemp, and flax. The grass liked her sweater, half linen, half orlan, and the hill, well, it spoke too. Of hot springs, silver vugs, she saw Orion near her signing galaxy, no longer alone. The tune of all things in and out could be summoned. For this the moon gave her leave. She took it, stretched her arms, and on the cowpaths taught all her dance, the Miserlou. If you don't know the dance, I can teach you. That last poem as well, not quite, but some of the other poems in the book turned out to have a certain structure which seemed to work for me, where I began with something personal or observed in nature, and I could grow out of that to some general observation about the world. I don't mean to sound pretentious. I just am trying to describe the structure of what seemed to work for me. And that's why I have used the word here, ode, which has a fancy feeling to it. But I think what I feel good about is that I'm able somehow to construct odes for my time, for our time. And I want to read one such, which combines some of these things. It's called Second Growth. And you've heard me in the very beginning talk about redwoods and growing up in fairy rings. So let me set the stage. We are in a forest near Santa Cruz. There are redwoods there. The redwoods are felled in the first decade of the 20th century to rebuild San Francisco. And they are cut down, but around them grow in a fairy ring of redwoods, which has to be seen to be believed. Around the stump in the middle, a gigantic stump, there grows a fairy ring of redwoods, and 100 years later, they are reaching for the sky. And into that come roads, logging roads to bring bicyclists and tourists in. And I walked through that. And this is where this poem comes from. It was called El Corte de Madera. Second growth. Everywhere, redwood stumps. El Corte de Madera, but not all trees served. The live oak and madrone they let be. And when ground shook and San Francisco had to be rebuilt, they cut the sequoia, they cut clear the tree called sempervirens. 100-year-old stumps still solid. Tough wood. 5 feet above ground, the fellers cut notches for springboards where they stood with 12-foot saws. Teams of oxen, later steam donkeys, their winches straining, waited to pull the logs on skids uphill, in the air, cursing, cracking whips and kerosene. Moss on every brown stump, and live oak, lichen on every rock, and the concrete sculpture, ferns, cream bush, and gooseberries grow in the shadows. A squirrel leaves neat sections of an acorn on the stump. A fairy ring, second growth, not of mushrooms up through needles, but now of 100-year-old trees, what clones poking holes in the sky, gently hugging the stump. On the ground, the surprising small cones of redwoods echo the reddish brown of bark and burl, each cone a cathedral of spiky futures. A road is cut out of paradise. Where this one-time logging road was widened, clay and loose stone washed down in spring. Last year, a redwood, its roots weakened, fell across. When they cut it, I count 150 rings. This road asks for care in its second growth. The road you and I will travel is one that has been touched by Pacific mist, by people, the cultivated land, the stump, cattle crossing, the hip rows, tenants in common, redwood and coyote, a poet, cross paths, flinch and feed, tenants in perpetuity on a blue world. With Adam 1 and Adam 2. The beginning was doubled, bright, stark ingenuities given to the first Adam and Eve. Tomorrow their brood will find microbes to feed on plastic bottles and caps floating in the North Pacific Gyre, and elsewhere turn them to Rhodes. Past Dominion they will walk hand in hand with the children of those who till and tend of the second Adam needing Eve. Together they'll build this road. A road out of paradise for you and me does not stretch ahead on land alone. It flies with the hawk and plunges into every phosphorescent bay and down the dark, deep underwater canyons. We will walk down the road, you and I, dance down it in life's samba like scuttling crabs, people, dear people, and manzanita and machines, aware of the one earth, commingling strategies and wisdoms in slow fixes, earth healing at our touch. Thank you very much. For more, read the poems in the book. The book is readily available from Buffalo Street Books and also on the usual sellers like Amazon and in other places as well. Thank you.
With thanks, Roald. I really very much appreciate to hear these poems read aloud. That's a great word, helixirs.
Elixirs.
Elixirs. Just sort of rolls. There are a few questions in the chat, so I'll read these out and if you want to discuss them.
Yes, sure.
So the first question from Stephen Strogatz, in at least 2 of the poems you read today, you seem to take inspiration from the idea that viral genes are integrated into our DNA. If that is indeed a recurrent theme in your poetry, could you tell us what you find inspiring about our commingling with viruses?
Yes, I just think it's such a natural proof of the tinker nature of evolution. One interesting thing about it is that this is not the best of all possible worlds. We can improve on it, and there are some things perhaps worth improving. And perhaps with cultural evolution, to take a positive view rather than a negative view, we can find some of those ways of dealing with it. Yes, thanks for noticing, Stephen. I found it extremely interesting that we had these genes preserved in us, and that we are finding out more and more about what seem to be arbitrary regions of code, which aren't arbitrary at all, but which are some history. That's why that poem was called Code Memory, because of that ancestral memory that is in that code.
Thank you, Roald. Another question. Is there a significance to where the stanzas are divided in your poems?
Sometimes, very often I do it to cause some interest in the break. Sometimes I do want to guide the reading to a stutter or to slow down at that point. there are times when I don't do that, but I use it to make it more interesting to read in terms of the sound, though I cannot control how a person reads it at all. And I myself, reading the same poem another time, will read it in a different way and will stop more or less at either a end of a line or a stanza. But as you saw in this last poem of Second Growth, there these one-line things gave me a place to change subject, so to speak, so that I could change from the specific to the general, or I could change from the place where, so there I was doing this in some ways more classically. I was changing from a description of how the trees were felled to a squirrel and what it saw, what the squirrel left on a wood stump. And then I could change again. I do construct those carefully.
Thank you, Roald. How about any poems about the glaciated Northeast?
Oh dear, not as far as I know. I have some snow poems somewhere, but nothing about the glaciated Northeast yet. Maybe I will learn something perhaps from my daughter, Ingrid, who works somewhat with climate change.
Thank you. Here's another one. How does Professor Hoffman decide when to write from a female voice as opposed to a male? And she noticed one person was from a female perspective. Yeah,
that's right. The Miserlou poem was written from a female perspective. I don't know exactly why. I mean, some things I enter directly, so I'm not afraid of using my name. You saw two poems at least, which used my name in them. The one about encountering the brain on the path, and another one about the experience with the clay. But sometimes I like wandering off into another person's voice, and I was perhaps, I don't know, I was somehow, maybe I had just seen the movie of Carl Sagan's Contact novel, and there is a female astronomer there that is in there, and that stimulated me. There was some visual image that brought that up.
So I was wondering also if your mind is in the same place when you write poetry and science, or are they distinct languages in your head?
So it's the same mind. I do, in the last decades, I have needed to go away to write poetry. And it's just, it wasn't that way in the beginning. And in the days when we used to meet with Archie, Phyllis, and David in the Temple of Zeus, if we said we're going to meet next week, I would write a poem for next week. I didn't know about what, but I would write a poem. So I was rising to the challenge of an assignment. After that, it became somewhat difficult to do that. And then I found that I had to go away. And when I went away, usually to some place that had a different kind of nature. By taking walks and concentrating on nature, I could clear my mind and open it up to things which the world was trying to tell me. But after that, I could go back to writing a poem about science. But it was that clearing of the mind. Whereas here in Ithaca, often when I wake up, my mind fills with everything that I have to do that day here. And that's not the right setting. But I'm glad to report that lately, various events have prompted my again being able to write some poems here. For instance, I have a great new poem about the Senator from Hell, which is about the insurrection drive, which another day I'll read for you. Anyway, I've been driven by some current events to write some things. So things have changed.
Appreciate that you're internalizing, but I'm sorry about the inspiration.
Yes, that's right. So just like one can ask someone, Adorno asked, can you write poetry after Auschwitz? Yeah, of course you can. So can you write poetry about the insurrection? Of course. You can write poetry about anything.
There's another question from Chad. This person mentions that they notice you often use Japanese cultural motifs. What
Yes.
compels you to draw on these?
So I feel the culture of Japan fairly strongly. It again goes back to college. When at Columbia one day, I was sitting in on some courses just for fun. I could do so much in those days. Anyway, I walked into this class and it was a course in Japanese literature. This was as a sophomore at Columbia, I think. And what I didn't know was I had a stroke of luck. The teacher was an assistant professor. This is 1956 at Columbia. And his name was Donald Keene. And he turned out to be the prime person in the popularization of Japanese literature in America, and a great translator of classics. And I was introduced to Japanese literature then. Later, other aspects of Japan, I don't know the language, but I had close ties with a number of Japanese scientists. Kenichi Fukui was the person who got the Nobel Prize in the same year I did, and he became a friend. I got to know about Japanese ceramics, and there is a connection through Marty Young, a former curator at the Johnson Museum. So Japan, I feel close to Japan. Yes, there are Japanese things in there.
Thank you. That's a long, winding history. Here's another wonderful question here, Roald, that threads from that in some ways. Do you have any suggestions for a student who is starting a chemistry PhD in the fall and hoping to continue poetry writing practice simultaneously?
Yes, definitely continue. So I often get this question from people in college who are faced with a decision. Should I go to medical school or engineering school, or should I go on in the arts and humanities, which I love? So do not lose your passions. There will be a place for them, no matter what you do. And even though the science is both demanding and addictive, the place for music, art, other spiritual things, writing, will always find a way. Keep a place for it and keep on doing it. It'll give you a spiritual stability in times when sometimes the science goes badly. It won't help you directly with the science, but we could talk about that. But it'll help you. It'll help you become a whole human being, and you can do it. I'm an example of being able to do it, to maintain that.
Thank you, Roald. Yes. So I know you have two translations, or two bilingual publications.
Yes.
And now there's a question in the chat if you've written poems in languages other than English.
No, so I've been through many languages. English was my sixth language when I came here at age 11. And since then, I've learned 3 or 4 more, and I've forgotten some of those 6 that I knew. So I can get along in 4 languages now: German, Swedish, English, and Russian, and understand lots more. But part of that, before you think that that's a miracle, let me tell you, this is everyday stuff of life for a European, especially for one in a wartime situation. No one asks you when you're going to some school afterwards, what language is the school? You just go to the school, whatever language it is, and you learn the language of the school. That's how I got my 6 languages before age 11. And in the same way, so, but now I can only I can only write in English. So when I'm in one of the countries where that, for any length of time, where that language is around me, it begins to flow into me and I begin to think in that language. That happened even to languages that came only from sort of high school on to me, like French. When I was in a Lubaron for a month, I began to think in French, and my English was affected in the beginning, maybe not so badly by some little strangenesses, but later I think my English would have decomposed. So maybe my mind is not made up to be completely bilingual, but I have no trouble with languages otherwise. A good question. No, I can't write in any language except English.
That's interesting to reflect on that, actually. Does fit in. One other question I didn't want to miss. Someone's mentioned you've written a lot of poetry and plays, but there are narrative aspects in many of the poems. Yes. Have you considered writing works of fiction, novels, or short stories? Or is there something about the poetry and playwriting that resonates?
Yeah, the answer is I've considered about it, but I haven't tried it, which is unusual because usually I try anything. But I somehow, I have to try, but I have doubts about my ability to write a novel. I read much fiction. In fact, I read very little nonfiction, except for chemistry. But I have not thought about writing any other narratives. But I've somehow, the poetry, maybe it's again going these college days. The plays also go back to college and to seeing a production of Blood Wedding at Barnard when I was at Columbia. And that was the first play that had a great impact on me. Haven't tried it yet. Anyway, there's still a little time left. I can't hear you, Leah.
Oh, sorry, it's been a long day. Yes. As this will be the last question, probably we're at the top of the hour, but you mentioned that class at Columbia, reading poetry with Professor Van Doren. Is that the first time you thought about poetry?
Actually, before that, I had some poetry. I think it was of the Evangeline type. And in school, in around 7th or 8th grade, it didn't make much of an impact. In college, it was better, but I somehow, still the poetry did not make an impact on me. No, that college course is when it was, when it had a certain impact. This is why I'm in general in favor of a liberal arts education, and that at that point, a young person is at the right stage to receive the kind of stimulation that good poetry and fiction can do and plays. But college is very important. It was for me, as you can see. Thank you all for listening. And thank you, Leah, for doing this, for introducing me.
Thank you, Roald, for sharing these with us. Jenny has put in a link into the chat with the YouTube information where we will post the channel for the Chat in the Stacks, where Roald's poems will be.
Thank you and goodbye.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thanks so much, Roald.
This has been a production of Cornell University Library.